at this session.
Wonderful. Then I will be very brief, and I want to welcome everybody to our third meeting of the West Seattle Bridge Community Task Force. In just a moment, I'm going to hand it over to our two co-chairs who are going to give us a brief overview of the agenda for items that we're going to cover today. And I just want to again go over a little bit of housekeeping for everybody and a few technical clarifications. So for all of our panelists, all of the community task force members who joined us today, the chat box is a great way to ask questions and engage. People are also welcome to raise their hands, but I will help Paulina and Greg, our co-chairs, monitor those questions being raised in the chat box, and also just acknowledging that there will be space built in for each section, each subject of conversation for Q&A, so there will also be appropriate moments for people to ask and raise questions. And again, ask that people try and use the chat box and raise hands, but also want to acknowledge that if people have a question and feel like it's not being raised, it is appropriate to come off mute and share. Speaking of mute, everyone, please keep your lines muted. Even if you're not saying anything or making any noise, just the echo of your speaker into your microphone can create feedback. So appreciate everyone staying on mute to the greatest extent possible. And then finally, just appreciate everybody's time here this afternoon. And with that, I will turn it over to our co-chairs to get us going.
Good afternoon, everybody. Paulina, let me just kick off, and then I'll turn it over to you for the next for welcome and also for the working group conversation. Is Charlene Robbins on the call? Charlene's a member of the task force who hasn't had a chance to introduce herself to the rest of us. I'm guessing by the lack of response, she's not with us. And we know that Katie Garrow isn't here today, but will be joining us at our next meeting. We're going to talk about the working group agreement that we all discussed a week ago and have taken a look at in the days since. We're going to get another update from our structures superintendent about how the bridge is doing this week. We're going to meet the technical advisory panel through their co-chairs, Barbara Moffett and Scott Phelan, who are already with us, and we thank them for their time. And we're going to get another update from Heather, going a little bit deeper into the reconnecting of West Seattle conversation that we started last week. And we're going to talk about Low Bridge and how to expand and change access to the Low Bridge during the closure of the upper facility. So with that, thank you all very much. This is our third Wednesday in a row. We changed the time up on you a little bit, moved it up. And we thank you for being adaptable to that. We will give you next Wednesday off. You can celebrate the 4th of July in whatever fashion your family enjoys. You get the week off from this, at least formal meeting, and we will take it up again the following Wednesday, which I think is July 8th. So thank you so much for your time, attention, and engagement in this. Paulina?
Thank you, everyone. Hello, Paulina Lopez here, representing the Duwamish Valley and also the Director for the Donahue River Cleanup Coalition. I'm happy to be back with you. And I wanted to especially thanks to those of you who got some time to send some reflections on the last meeting. We all are making sure that we're reading your reflections and acting upon the agenda. I also want to thank the 12 members that got back to us with the group working agreements. Very appreciative, as you can see on the screen. Seems like we already are turning into getting some group agreements, make the decision what best will describe our group. And some of those that I'll be reading out loud, if you didn't send it yet, please do so. But seems like balance advocacy and inquiry will be an important agreement to have, as well as actively participate, be fully present, respect the views of all participants, and allow the time to do that for sure. Making sure we're respecting the role and rely on each other expertise. There was a question about when we are talking about I, and either you're representing yourself or the groups, and definitely we acknowledging that you're representing your communities and your groups. So it's not just you speaking up. And then transparency came out to be an important agreement to have. So those will be lining up. When we heard from the rest of you, 12 wasn't a lot of people that responded, but I'm still very appreciative what you're looking into having for this. I will be talking about through the meeting how we can exercise these is important, as I said, as groups. And moving on to the next, Greg.
Well, I just noticed that Charlene Robbins has joined us. Charlene, would you introduce yourself to the group?
Hi, I'm Charlene Robbins, and I'm a physician assistant at the High Point here in West Seattle, where I've been working for, well, a long time, the past 20 plus years with the Neighbor Care Health Organization. My husband and I have lived in West Seattle for about 25 years, and we have 3 kids, one that just graduated from STEM school, another one that's at STEM, and then one that's at Madison Middle School. I also am one of the medical providers who work at the West Seattle High School as one of the 2 medical providers that services the high school students there. So sorry, I am going to have some conflicts with attending the full meetings just because my clinic starts back up at 12:45. So I'll be here at meetings as much as I can, but probably won't ever get to do the full meeting, unfortunately.
Charlie, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your willingness to participate in this really important project.
Yep. I also do serve on the Board of Transitional Resources, just as a couple other, which is here in West Seattle. A lot of people don't actually know about it, but it's a really awesome organization. I've been a board member for about 9 years. Serves people who are at very high risk mental health disorders for long-term housing. So I've been part of that. It's people with like bipolar schizophrenia that are coming out of Western State or coming off the streets or coming out of jail, and they get long-term housing, which can be, some of their residents have been there 20 years. So we are in the process of building a brand new building. So we'll have 44 new units in about a year and a half for 44 more people who will be coming from either Western State or off the street. So it's an organization that I have a lot of love and support for. So.
Thank you, Charlene.
Yep.
Matt Donahue, our structure supervisor, is joining us and going to give us this week's State of the Bridge. Matt?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Nichols and Paulina. I appreciate that. My name is Matt Donahue. I'm the interim director for roadway structures, which is the division at the DOT that takes care of all the city's bridges, areaways, retaining walls, and stairways. So just a first slide here to cover or reiterate a couple of things from last week. These are generally the paths that we're moving on to figure out what the near-term and long-term solutions for the bridge are. Those could be the same, or it could be repair first and then replacement. So if you look at the slide, we covered a bit of this last week, so I won't spend too much time here. In both cases, we're doing the work that we're doing now, which is to stabilize the bridge. So Kramer North America is actively working at the bridge and at a construction yard that's just not too far upstream from the bridge. And so they're getting ready to, they're building lifting platforms that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, and getting ready to get up to the bottom of the bridge and start doing carbon fiber wrap work, as well as post-tensioning strand on the exterior of the girder, but inside the girder box. You'll meet the TAP a little bit later in this meeting, and one of the main things that they're helping us with is framing up how we do our cost-benefit analysis to study at a conceptual level repair options versus replacement options. And so this graphic really just explains the steps in that as we move along with a decision point later this year in the fall about which way to go, repair first and replace down the road, or pivot towards replacement immediately. But again, as a reminder, in both those cases, this fall, we will later this summer, early this fall, we will complete the stabilization work that Kramer, North America, SDOT, and WSP are currently engaged in. Next slide, please. So just a little bit reminder here on what stabilization is. The photo on the right of this slide is not necessarily what our stabilization measures will look like, but it's a similar example where you see the black striping both in the transverse and longitudinal directions are carbon fiber wrap that have been affixed to the exterior of the bridge to strengthen it. We will do something similar to that. And then just a few comments here on the left. If we were to go the repair route, we're trying to be mindful of that possibility and implementing these stabilization or crack arrest measures so that if we went the repair route, largely the repair would just be an expansion of those stabilization measures. So we tried to design it in such a way that we could expand on it and use it, and we wouldn't have to rip it out and start over from scratch if we go the repair route. Concurrently, the stabilization measures will also assist if we were to go to the shoring and demolition route as part of a replacement scheme. So we're trying to be really careful to be expeditious in stabilizing the bridge and stop it from continuing to crack, but we're also trying to do it in a way that we can use that same stabilization for other means, to expand it for long-term repair or to use it as part of a shoring and demolition scheme for replacement. Next slide, please. Oh, and one thing to note on that previous slide, although you don't have to go back, is that if we do go from stabilization and went to the repair route, for continuity and expediency and cost savings, we intend to continue to work with WSP if we went the repair route, because they would be expanding on their own design. You'll also recall last week that we talked about if we go the replacement route, or because we know we have to replace the bridge, whether it's in the near term or the long term, we're already procuring a consultant in a competitive process for replacement studies. So just a little bit more detail on the stabilization work. The idea is there will be exterior post-tensioning strand. So it's outside the surface of the concrete, but it's actually in the girder, basically mounted to the top of the girder floor on the inside. And then also there's carbon fiber wrap that will be affixed to the outside of the girders. And to do that, we need to get up to the bridge. And the quickest, safest, most cost-effective way to do that we determined was to basically take wire rope winches, put them up on the bridge deck, water blast holes through the deck so the wire ropes can be lowered down to a barge that will have these lifting platforms, and you basically just motor the barge in place, pick it up to the bottom of the bridge. It has travel rails on it so that it can move along the bridge, and then the barge gets tucked away to a safe location. And then we repeat that same process, lower it back down, put it on a barge, move it to the next location as we go through our stabilization work. Next slide, please. So that's 4 platforms or 4 moves in total. As a reminder to our partners in commercial maritime community, there is a reduction of clearance by up to 7 feet. These platforms will be in place at different locations around the bridge, roughly from July through November. And we'll have many safety measures in place, including amber lights. And of course, there's close coordination between contractor Kramer, who's working on the bridge, our bridge operators, and the Coast Guard to provide sufficient notice and coordination and communication during these operations to make it as seamless as possible and to lessen the impact to the commercial maritime community as we do our stabilization operation. Next slide. So just a little bit of a recap. We'll, of course, have many BMPs in place on site, including containing any debris that might be introduced into the waterway. Our barge movements will be, it's been possible with the size of the barge that you could do the movements with one tug, but we feel it's safer to do it with two, just because of the tight space that we're trying to work in, despite the size of the barge. Everybody will be on channel 13, which is fairly normal for this type of operation. And as I mentioned, we'll have good communication between Kramer, the SDOT team overall, myself in particular as the bridge manager for the city, and our bridge operators for the Spokane Street Swing Bridge, as well as the Coast Guard. And we've already, I think, begun to work with the Coast Guard on issuing an L&M. And Kramer is also part of our partner communication, if you will, as is normal for a contractor that has taken possession and is working on a site. They're trying to coordinate with any of the adjacent activities, including other construction sites. For instance, there's a construction site near the swing bridge with SPU, and they've already been coordinating with them. Next slide.
Matt, could you tell us what a BMP is and what an LMN is?
Oh, sorry. A BMP is best management practice. So they're typically stipulations that come with a permit that say, you know, these are the things, the measures we want you to have in place for safety and for other operational reasons. And then an L&M is a local notice to mariners. And so it is, I think, I can't remember if it's in print or not, but it's certainly online, and it's a weekly publication where the Coast Guard puts out information for all the commercial waterways for this district. That the U.S. Coast Guard wants the maritime community to be notified of and aware of.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir. And with that, I think this next goes back to Paulina to talk about the TAP.
Yeah, but first I see that there's a question from one of our members. Question is, can we get the bridge up to seismic standards with the shoring repair work?
Shoring repair. So,
and also, sorry, let me just do that. Also, regarding slide 28, priority seems to be given to emergency response vehicles and industries with no viable alternatives, such maritime and harbor island. So if you could address
those questions are with regard to low bridge access. So we'll certainly bring those back up when we come to low bridge access discussion.
Yeah, and for the other question relating to seismic, so seismic is a concern that we're already discussing in detail, but it's too soon to really say anything definitive. But just to give folks a little bit more information, certainly if we did a partial replacement or a full replacement of the bridge, we would be in the arena of what are today's seismic standards. And we're also at the same time trying to figure out to what extent seismic resiliency has to be incorporated into a repair. So that is high in mind. And as we get more into that and have more details to share, I imagine we'll be reporting out on that to this group.
Great. Thank you. So I guess we should move into, we're doing great on time, to meet a couple of members from our technical advisory panel, or more known as the TAP. And so the idea, first the members, Barbara Moffat and Scott Phelan will be with us. And the idea is to know how the community task force will be working and together with our TAP, our technical advisory panel, discovering the best recommendations, listening from them, from their expertise, and how are we working together on the written recommendations they are giving to SDOT, but also very importantly, that we could ask questions as community, what it's important to us, or what information we should be asking our TAP. So welcome, Barbara and Scott.
Thank you.
We can hear you.
Hello. You can hear me? Okay.
Okay.
Is Barbara there?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah. Scott and Barbara, we can hear both of you now.
Sorry about that. So
That's fine.
we are going to be covering 4 items today, really introduce the TAP members, and then we will tell you about the role that we have as the technical advisory panel. We did list some of our charter items that we are charged to do for the City of Seattle, and then what our priorities are. So if you would go to the next slide, please. We thought it'd be nice for you to be able to see some of it, since you can all see each other virtually now with this method of meeting. And so I am Barbara Moffat. I'm a co-chair with Scott, and I've just ticked over into 36 years of experience as a structural engineer. I've worked on both international and national projects in tunnel and bridge design, and I am looking forward very much to being on the TAP. I'm also going to be introducing Steve Dickinson. He is a geotechnical engineer with over 30 years of experience in seismic performance assessments of foundations for bridges. Basically, he has his expertise in soil structure interaction under seismic conditions. He has a fair amount of experience in the lower Duwamish and Puget Sound area, although he currently resides in Nevada. And so we are getting great information from him from a geotechnical perspective. Scott?
Okay, hi, I'm Scott Phelan. I see I have the same jacket on as the picture, but hopefully this is a different shirt, okay? I'm Scott Phelan, National Chief Bridge Engineer of David Evans and Associates of Seattle. I've worked on numerous concrete segmental bridges, including 2 world record bridges. Actually, one of the world record bridges is pictured behind me, is the Confederation Bridge, also known as the Northumberland Strait Crossing in Prince Edward Island, Canada, and it's actually very similar, except for the cracking, it's very similar to the West Seattle High-Rise Bridge. And I want to thank the City of Seattle for the opportunity for me and David Evans to serve on this technical advisory panel and to assist Matt and his team and WSP. And I will introduce Adolphe Furtado. He's joined the panel as well. And Adolphe is the president of Lynn & Associates. He's got 24 years of experience, construction experience, focused on public infrastructure. And Adolphe is already gathering a number of construction items, documents, and presenting that to the team. And it's going to be a really good addition to the TAP.
Next, please. So Reggie Hulk is with the Federal Highway Administration, FHA headquarters in DC, and he is a senior structural engineer of concrete structures specialty, and he really likes to engage in emerging technologies and bridge issues. And then Greg Freeby has over 30 years of experience in bridge engineering. He was the former director of the bridge division at the Texas DOT, and he is currently a director at ASBE, American Segmental Bridge Institute. So he brings a lot of experience with this type of a bridge structure.
Okay, and Debbie Lehman is on our panel as well. She's the Washington Division Bridge Engineer for the Federal Highway Administration, and she's in Olympia overseeing Department of Transportation bridge design and oversight of local bridges. I think should just stop real quickly with seeing Reggie out of FHWA in DC, and Debbie and Greg, former TxDOT. Definitely this situation has captured the attention of the National Bridge Group. And so we definitely welcome Debbie on as well. And John Stanton, you can see there's a professional civil engineering, but actually John started as a practicing bridge engineer and worked on the Montreal Olympic Games Stadium. He then went into academia, and he's got experience in concrete, pre-stressed concrete, and bridge bearings. John is a world expert on seismic and concrete, and this is, and as the slide says, he has over 50 years experience as a structural engineer. So we're all we're getting to know each other, very happy about this panel, and looking to serve the City of Seattle as best we can.
So I think at this point, we're going to go over, this is from our charter, and Scott's going to lead us in really talking about what the role of a TAP is and what we're focusing on right now.
Yes, and so we have a number of bullet items, and they actually seem to increase as well, but we're probably maybe looking at the top three immediately, and for today, mostly on bullet number one. But just because we're talking about bullet number one does not mean we haven't dipped into some of the others. But for now, we are focused on data gathering. We're looking at the as-built documentation, instrumentation results, and the analysis of the current structure. We will be providing guidance on all aspects of the bridge program, including the repair, replace decisions, design plan review at several stages, and construction delivery methods and approach, construction and technical document review. It is important that though we are working with Matt and his team and WSP, we are independent and we're providing qualitative reviews and input to the city and elected officials. And we will also provide input directly to SDOT at key milestones or decision points so that we can document, confirm any recommendations or conclusions.
And I'd like to add on to that is that, you know, with respect to the priorities for the TAP, getting up to speed is probably the most critical thing. We've been on board for a few weeks now, and it's almost like drinking through a fire hose, as I'm sure all of you are aware of. And luckily, SDOT has WSP on board, and they have been on for a much longer period of time, have been working on analysis and looking at results of some of the instrumentation and monitoring. And so as we get up to speed, we are really critically focused right now on the priority of understanding why, and so that we can understand the root cause, so that the emergency repairs are actually being affected where needed. So it's critical to know why something is happening in order to repair it. And so we've met a few times independently. We've met with SDOT and WSP. They have been very, very helpful in answering our questions and making sure that we are up to speed with where they are. And we're getting a lot of our background information brought up to speed so that we know what to do moving forward. So I think that kind of gives a high level point of where we are right now. If you want to go to the next slide, please. I think it's important for us to note that the role of the TAP co-chairs for Scott and myself, we're going to be coordinating very frequently with SDOT and the city, making sure that any input from the TAP is discussed and brought to their attention. We will also, though, however, be participating and presenting in meetings such as this with a community task force, with a city council, with others, particularly when we have provided advice or guidance. And at key milestones, those decision points, Scott and I will be present to be able to keep you informed. The transparency of the decisions is important. And as Scott mentioned, we are an independent panel that has been brought together. So we have no ulterior motive. We are looking for the best thing for the city, for the community, for everyone moving forward. And I think with that, that was kind of the high-level overview. We have some time where we'll be able to answer some specific questions that come up. And Scott and I will tag team on these and see how we do with answering them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott and Barbara. And I would just sort of acknowledge the conversation with the TAP co-chairs today as an opportunity to discuss what that relationship is between the TAP and the West Seattle Bridge Community Task Force, and then clear understanding of the universe of things under consideration by the TAP and the composition and expertise within the TAP, but less so sort of a report out of what the TAP is thinking, has discovered, et cetera. As Scott and Barbara intimated, they're still getting up to speed and processing all of the data and information that's being shared. But to kick things off, I do see a question that is within that prior scope that I identified from poor Commissioner Steinbrook, and he says, I don't see any transportation planners on the TAP. Shouldn't access issues be a part?
So I will start with this and then turn it over to Matt. I think that for what we are currently tasked with, as Scott showed, we are looking right now at these emergency crack repairs. And with respect to that, we are looking for bridge stabilization moving forward, emergency fixes of the cracks. So as the task force moves forward, SDOT may need to add a transportation planner as it goes into a replacement option or a repair option. What are those different dynamics? But that the makeup of the panel is truly up to SDOT, and we are focused right now on that first bullet of data gathering and emergency repairs. But Matt, maybe you can respond more fully to that.
Thanks, Barbara. That actually was pretty much what I would say. The TAP started out with a group of people, and before it even got off the ground, we expanded it for specific technical needs that we realized we should have on the TAP as we thought more and more about what the TAP was going to do. And so that, depending on how work progresses versus repair and longer term replacement or near term replacement, that may change how we think about the composition of the TAP.
Thank you, Matt. We have another question from Charlie that's sort of building on the question that the Commissioner asked, saying, traffic planning being an important consideration as it relates to a pathway that may look at a tunnel as a potential option, and the need for tunnel-specific expertise. So perhaps, Barbara, do you want to talk about the composition of the TAP as it relates to expertise pertaining to submerged tunnels?
So yeah, we do have a breadth of experience on the panel. We have highlighted for you the focus on the bridge because that is what our first bullet is. I would like to say that I was heavily involved in the design of the immersed tube tunnel out at the Ted Williams Tunnel in Boston. I lived in Boston for almost 15 years, and I have significant tunnel experience on multiple different types of tunnels. So I do bring that if this goes toward a tunnel option, if that is through the type, size, and location, if the replacement would be going that way, I do have the expertise to be able to speak into that. That does not mean that we would not add other experts on that, but I do have that experience and firsthand knowledge of how that works, as well as other tunnel types of methodologies.
Thank you. And then we have a question asking about, is the TAP task was looking at costs, or is that going to be addressed separately? And I think this could also be partially addressed by Heather as well as Matt. But Barbara and Scott, also please feel free to speak to the scope that you understand for the TAP.
I could add something and then let someone follow up. Would that be okay? So our first recommendation will be on the feasibility of the repair of the bridge, and then we're also reviewing proposed methods of the emergency bridge repair and stabilization while these steps are proceeding. And then, then and at the same time, we will be looking at the cost-benefit analysis that's developed by SDOT's consultant, WSP.
It's Heather here. That's exactly right, Scott. The TAP will be looking at the cost benefit analysis, and so a part of that will be the financial cost to replacing this bridge with whatever we replace it with.
Michael, are you going to be following up on the questions on the chat? Because if not, I would like to flag from a couple, one from Ali Thompson.
Yes, please do flag that, and then I can continue saying out the questions that were shared, and apologies. The challenge to find your unmute button persists even for some of those.
So there's comment, I don't think it's a question, but open to all possible solutions, but must voice strong concerns in the Duwamish Valley about the impact a tunnel would have in our Duwamish River. And then there's another one, who in SDOT will be in charge of a tunnel?
So I think I'll just step in and then Matt, we are at a point where we are so early, if this is being addressed to the TAP, we are data gathering right now. And so to go down a path of saying, well, let's look at the specifics of a tunnel is already making that decision point. When Matt showed the decision matrix before, the decision is it being repaired or is it being replaced? And once that decision is made, then some of the specifics of these questions will come into play. I know that simultaneous to these emergency crack repairs, we are currently, SDOT is soliciting for a team to do a type, size, and location, and that would be part of that analysis that they do. But at this point, back it up to where we currently are, which is how are the crack arrests happening? How are we doing this emergency strengthening before going into a decision on a repair or replacement?
Thanks, Barbara. As I understood the question, who is going to own a tunnel if that ends up being the replacement? That's likely going to be an SDOT structural asset that'll be operated and maintained by roadway structures. But it's probably really too early to say that that's going to be the case with 100% certainty.
Thank you, Matt. I think there's just some acknowledgement of stirring some painful and past experiences about protracted discussions about repair versus replace from previous experience. So I'll leave that maybe open if people have comments about the ability and intent here to move expeditiously without shortchanging safety and critical technical understanding. So I'll put that there. And then also there is a more specific question with regard to when will the cost benefit analysis be available to the TAP?
I would have to defer to SDOT to know when it will be done. My understanding is that it will be sometime toward the end of the summer, potentially early fall. They're in the process of gathering numbers now.
That's correct.
If I could add, I think they've been giving us, they're starting to give us some of the assumptions, and hopefully we'll be able to make some inputs on that.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Barbara. There's a question from Anne that's asking about if it's looking whether a repaired bridge could stay in place while a new bridge is built. If that's part of the cost benefit analysis. There's also a question from Anne if there is consideration of reduced lanes and things like that. And so I just want to acknowledge Anne's questions and those bodies of questions that are forward-looking about what does this data mean, and just sort of acknowledge that the intent of this discussion is not fully to go there yet. I'll let Barbara and Scott speak to whether or not that's appropriate characterization as the TAP continues to understand the state and health of the bridge, but also for questions around understanding of considerations and the body of work for the TAP.
So these are excellent questions, partial lane reopening. I think at this point, since we are still coming up to speed and finalizing, really understanding what the repair technologies are going to be and how they're going to impact the structure and the analysis that goes along with that we are not necessarily at a point yet to be able to answer that, but it's an excellent question that we do need to revisit and look at and make sure that there is an answer to that.
And if I could add as well, as we get into this, if obviously, like Matt said, if it turns out that the replacement is just either not feasible or not economically feasible, which, by the way, we have not seen yet, but if that's the case, then if we did move to replace, if we thought we could do a short-term repair, then obviously we would need transportation planners would come on, and Matt and his team have already started looking for the design firm who would also have to probably include the transportation planners. But if we can't determine a way to repair it, then obviously the most likely is the same place that it's in. But if we can do the repair, it gives a little more time for the replacement, but then you possibly may need to find another alignment. So, but if that addresses what Ann was bringing up.
There are a handful of both questions and comments, and Deb asks a poignant one, and maybe Barbara and Scott, as well as Matt, can add a little bit more context for a CBA and why that process takes time. So Deb's comment is end of summer for CBA, ? And ouch, which I think is a feeling shared by many. Absolutely, but perhaps we can get a little bit of better understanding of why that timeline is protracted in that way.
I think we're all waiting for everyone else to speak on this. Part of it is to ensure that the number of scenarios, a number have been mentioned here in the chat box, that everything is, you're looking at everything and comparing it equally. So for instance, if there were, this is just an example, if there were a long-term strengthening, you would also need to say that there's a component of monitoring that would need to go in, and how long would you be monitoring it for? So there's a lot of data gathering. We want these costs to be accurate in order to make valid decisions. And so there's a lot of work that needs to go into this, as well as understanding the viability of these different scenarios and how they fit together. So it's just the process working through. I know WSP is working hard on that, and like Scott said, we're already starting to get some of the assumptions they're making, and that is critical for us to be in agreement on assumptions to come up with real costs. And as you know, the costs, once they are known, that's going to be a driver along with other decisions on what moves forward. And so we want to be sure that it is careful and accurate and supportable.
Yeah, Barbara, thank you for those comments. That's all true. You know, a full amount of respect to the folks in West Seattle. I don't live in the neighborhood. I have family and close friends there. I can only imagine and try to keep high in mind the impact to the community. So I really understand. I think that people are frustrated, that they want to see things move quickly. And we've kept that high in mind as well from the day that we closed the bridge. So it may seem like we haven't been doing much. I could assure you that I personally have put in hundreds of extra hours, nights and weekends to address this issue. If you expand it out to the team and the consultant and the contractor, it's thousands and thousands of personnel hours that have been thrown towards this over the last few months. And I think we've mentioned this previously, we're doing as much as we can in parallel, which included right after the day that we closed the bridge and shortly after, being on that bridge daily, 7 days a week, until we felt like we thoroughly understood how rapidly it was deteriorating under its own weight. That also included designing and installing millions of dollars of instrumentation on both the high and the low bridge, so that we can keep a very close eye on it for public safety and to understand what is wrong or not wrong with the structure. So that also includes all the non-destructive evaluation that we've done. In parallel, we started the cost benefit analysis, doing the conceptual level designs that have to be done so you know what to compare weeks ago, as well as designing all the stabilization measures, as well as coordinating with all of our partners in the community, as well as standing up an emergency response plan with all of our EMS partners. So there has been a substantial amount of work that would normally take years that has been conducted in weeks and months.
And if I could just add too, just being brief on this, I think we all are able to kind of make a back of the envelope cost comparison, which I've done as well. But I would say that it is nice that the bridge, but it is more complicated than that actually, is what I wanted to say. And there's seismic issues, there's funding issues, there's the instrumentation, there's the state of the current bridge. Luckily for us, SDOT has this bridge very heavily instrumented. It's been inspected many, many times, so we have a lot of information to go after. So I just wanted to add that, and perhaps don't want to, maybe SDOT has some other comments on this as well.
And maybe I'll just sort of pause a bit there, because this line of questioning is aligning with others, including from Rick Cody. I see that Councilmember Herbold several minutes ago physically raised her hand, and I caught it out of the corner of my eye on video. So Councilmember Herbold, I want to recognize you, and then we're also going to turn to Representative Cody's question, which has been echoed by several other members of the task force around the scope of cost-benefit analysis, and then also just the opportunity to sort of clarify definitions of repair as it aligns with the TAP and SDOT thinking. So Councilmember Herbold, please.
Thank you. I first want to recognize that the questions about the cost-benefit analysis are very important and whose role that is. But I do want to thank the TAP for including in their scope the recognition that looking forward about what the alternatives are, that it's really important to look at the whys. I had been concerned, and I know other people have been concerned, that that the TAP's charge was going to be very forward-looking, as opposed to looking at what conditions led us to the closure of the West Seattle Bridge. So I just mostly wanted to express some appreciation for the recognition of how important that piece of work is as well.
Thank you. Could I add something onto that? I know that this has been an extremely disruptive thing to have this bridge closed. I don't live in West Seattle, and I can't imagine what the community is experiencing through that. However, I have done multitudes of inspections on both tunnels and bridges and in segmental boxes. And I just want to give assurance to the community that if I were the one who was walking out there on a daily, weekly, first basis, and then daily basis, and I saw the cracks and the crack propagations and their locations and how they were, the widths of them, and just the patterning that was shown there, I would have made the same decision that SDOT did. I would have recommended that that bridge structure be closed immediately. So I know that has been a difficult thing to have to accept, that all of a sudden your major form of commute is closed. But that is something that, from a structural perspective, that was a sound and good decision. And so I speak on behalf of the TAP, saying that this was something needed, and to understand the why, what happened, and get to that root. You don't want to put a Band-Aid on without understanding what that is. So I just wanted to say that we affirm the direction that this is going, and we are completely supportive of getting this thing back in service, whether it's a repair or replacement, as soon as possible to reconnect the community.
I just want to also flag something following up on what Barbara just mentioned, that encourage community task force members to send more. What are some of the things that we would like our TAP, our technical advisory panel, to address? I think they should hear more often from us, and I just wanted to bring it to what is the type of research that we should be as community for them to develop more information, as well as on these cost-benefit analysis. I think it'll be important that you hear more often from us. So my question to you both is, what would be the way to do this? Because I think, as we're speaking on technical advisory board, but also community task force, I really want this to be hearing from us, from community. So what would be the best venue to do that?
I think the best way is to go through Lorelei and Megan. Would that be correct?
I would applaud that.
Sorry, I was unmuting and unvideoing myself. Hi, everybody. Megan Shepard. And so one of the things that we had hoped, right, is that the TAP is going to be working through a series of things that were shown on the earlier slide. And when they reach the point that they're coming to the place where they want to provide some key input or key guidance to SDOT, that Barbara and Scott would come back and speak to you guys about it as well at that time. And I think, Paulina, you're also raising the reverse, is to ensure that the flow of the community task force is, and the voices of the task force are being heard by the TAP as well. Though the TAP is primarily focused on a lot of the technical and the structural issues that are before them, the monitoring data, and they use many, many words that I don't understand when they talk to one another, which I really appreciate about them. And so, you know, part of that is whenever they meet, Heather brings to their meeting a like, here's the state of community right now on this project. Here's what we're hearing. Here's the key issues of concerns to our task force and our other advisory groups. So they know what is happening around their technical inquiries at this time. So that's what we have right now.
And so, Paulina, I did want to say, obviously, we're interested in whatever everybody else is interested in. At the same time, we recognize the seriousness of the situation, and that's why we are really focused on our first bullet item. But even next week, we're getting a little bit into the second one as well, and the cost-benefit analysis. But for right now, we would love, just like everyone else would love to, I think everyone else, but most people would like to find that a good long-term repair is possible. If not a long-term, then a short-term, etc. So we're interested in everything, but right now that is the priority. I mean, for this week and next week, and yeah.
Thank you, Scott. I want to just do a quick time check here, and it may be that we will have additional time to shift into other areas of discussion for today. But we really wanted, just from a logistics standpoint, to provide ample room for discussion here. And so what that looks like is having about 10 to 15 more minutes with regard to talking about the role of the TAP and interactions with the task force. So just acknowledging a time check there. And then we had a question, 1242 for those scrolling up and down in the chat box, from Representative Cody saying, acknowledging some confusion. Matt's discussion last week with regard to repair, saying the bridge could be replaced, and whether or not they know they can repair the bridge, but they would be evaluating the CBA for the nuance. Is that the case? Then shouldn't the CBA also include bridge versus tunnel CBA? So perhaps I'll give Matt a chance to talk a little bit about that nuance as it relates to understandings around repair, and then Scott and Barbara as well, acknowledging that we're just sort of talking about a little bit of clarification rather than just sort of guesswork as the TAP gets underway.
Thanks for that thorough question. So if I recall correctly, my comments last week were that I felt that we now know that we can, not if we should, but that we can repair the bridge. And that's specifically based on our non-destructive evaluation program and the fact that all that data came back and there was nothing in there that said that we couldn't fix the bridge. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that we should repair it and then go to replacement many years from now. All I'm saying is through all of our investigation work, we haven't found anything in terms of a specific structural detail or defect that says that we cannot repair the bridge. As far as the cost benefit analysis goes, the idea is to compare apples to apples. And so really the decision point for that, or what the decision point that CBA informs is, should we repair or replace a crossing on the bridge? And so for expediency and for efficiency, and because it's most effective to compare repair of a bridge to replacement with a bridge, that's the first step in the cost benefit analysis. We know we have to replace the bridge at some point. And in the type, size, and location study, that's the first part of that replacement process. That's where the tunnel comes in.
So I'll start and Barbara can finish if she wants. So as far as the TAP is concerned, I think it's very similar. If the TAP has not seen, we haven't been on this long enough to know that a repair can be done, but we have not seen anything to show us why it cannot be done. Also, there's a couple of things that you see when we look at these things. We look at both serviceability, which includes durability, and then we look at ultimate capacity. And so obviously there's quite a bit of cracking on the bridge, and that is indeed a serviceability issue. So those do, but if that was an ultimate capacity issue at the moment, the bridge would not even be functional. So we will be looking at that as well. Everyone has some ideas. Usually in a situation like this, it's several things that are causing the problems. We've got some very good ideas. Matt and his team have very good ideas. WSP has very good ideas. We're just wanting to make sure that we haven't presupposed everything before we finish our work.
Right, that's really what it does come down to, Scott. You said it well, is that we do not want to come in with assumptions. We are being open. So SDOT and WSP have been on this longer. We have not seen anything that would preclude at this point a repair, but we have not seen anything that proves a repair should be done. So we're trying to be as open and independent and taking all the information in at this. So we support Matt's comments last week. We are getting to the same place, but we are doing that in an independent manner to ensure that we arrive at the same place that they are. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to acknowledge that the hand raising function is also opportunity for people to come off mute and ask questions. But I am seeing comments, but perhaps not necessarily questions for our TAP co-chairs. Are there any additional questions, and acknowledging that there may be an opportunity to move ahead of schedule a little bit, because I do believe that having additional time towards the end to discuss the low bridge will be beneficial. So with that, any
Michael, last time
Yeah.
seems like we missed Jolene's question, so I would like to have Jolene on the microphone to ask her question or address her comment.
Jolene, please. No microphone. Let me read it then, Jolene. The problem we see is, why is the tunnel option even an option when we have no CBA? Long-term repair should be the focus, in my opinion. People are getting nervous about a tunnel option. No one is questioning the repair or replacement of the bridge.
We appreciate that input and that comment. As we stated, we are data gathering and we don't want to rule anything out. People being nervous about a tunnel option or the repair or replacement, I think we want to keep everything on the table and have valid reasons for moving forward or not moving forward with everything. So long-term repair is part of the CBA. Replacement is part of the CBA. These options that are on the table is not being a definitive direction for the future. They're options to be looked at. So I hope that helps you understand why there is discussion even of a tunnel option, and that would be for farther down the road if a replacement happens.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Herbold has identified she has another question. And I also want to provide, if it seems helpful, for Matt Donahue to just talk about the type, size, and location portion of this process and how that utilizes questions of sort of scope of replacement options.
It sounds like Matt is queued up to perhaps respond to my question, which is when will the type size and location study be completed?
Council member, excellent question. We're all trying to time this and know what the future holds and when we'll get this really important decision point information. But it's too early to even say when it will be done because we haven't selected a consultant yet. And I think it closes this week or next week, the solicitation for a consultant for replacement and to start with a type size and location study is still out on the street.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I seeing no additional hands or wavings on the computer screen. I'm going to turn it back over to our co-chairs, to Greg in particular, to introduce the next section of today's discussion.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you very much to our co-chairs of the Technical Advisory Committee. We're going to be relying on you, Barbara and Scott, and your fellow TAP members for your technical advice and counsel as we weigh in on some of the very same issues, but from a community standpoint and the needs of our various communities, the ones directly affected by the closure and the ones that are very directly affected by the change in behavior as a result of that closure. So we look forward to hearing from you and having a great conversation back and forth as you make your findings. We also will be dealing with how do we live through this process. And Heather's going to talk a little bit at digging the next level as we try and create a commute trip reduction system that is on steroids. How are we going to do that neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, and of course, traffic, transit, and all other modes of transportation that will be required to bring into the mix. So Heather, go for it.
Thank you very much, Mayor Nichols. It is, as always, a pleasure to be with you all and have an opportunity to talk about how SDOT is approaching this very significant and disruptive development. I am speaking to you from the overcast neighborhood of Fauntleroy here in West Seattle, which I have made my home for the past 25 years. The slide that you are looking at right now, I believe we showed you last week, and I just wanted to run over it one more time. So SDOT has collected ideas. We've developed some initial proposals. We've sent those proposals out to all the members of the task force. We're going to launch those out to the public on July 6th. We felt it was important to wait for everything to be all appropriately translated and accessible electronically before we launch that. We are looking forward to your input today. As we get that input, we will revise concepts. Eventually, we will update the plan for community endorsement, and then we will begin starting building and installing the projects. Next slide, please. So the multimodal action plan is one of those documents that we sent to you last Friday, and it includes all the discrete actions that SDOT can take similar to the improvements that we have already been making, like bike and freight improvements for all of you and for the neighborhoods to weigh in on. Eventually, we will fold all of those together into one program that our partners can bring to bear in order to help achieve those ambitious goals, which we will talk about here in a second. We also sent you the Reconnect West Seattle Mobility one-page action or two-page action plan, the freight improvement projects map and list, and the bike improvement projects map, and list. I just want to note that transit needs to be an important part of what SDOT and Metro bring to bear in order to encourage transit use, while understanding, and I'll say this again, that there are some significant limitations to transit during a global pandemic. If we could move to the next slide, please. So you may recall this chart from last week where we offered up some percentages that are an end state in 2021. That's not a starting place. We know we need to work collectively toward all those levels. And then the words, the bulleted list on the side shows for each neighborhood what kind of mode shift we need to be looking at. Obviously, if you live in Highland Park, the Highland Park neighborhood, using the water taxi maybe isn't quite as appealing as if you live in North Admiral or Alki. So we have set up different kinds of percentages for each of these neighborhoods to try to achieve. And part of the goal of our mobility action plan is to show the community what things SDOT could do in order to make those percentages more possible. Next slide, please. So in addition, we have developed some neighborhood traffic mitigation plans. These frameworks enable the neighborhoods that are most acutely impacted by the detour routes to lead and prioritize the projects that they believe will make the most difference in mitigating those impacts. So the documents that we sent to you include a flyer, a map, and a list for South Park, Georgetown, Soto, and then one document for Rocks Hill, Highland Park, Riverview, and South Del Ridge. Next slide, please. So the process that we're going to go through is that the community is going to lead this process with city support. We really do not want the city to be in there influencing where each community feels they want to go. We're there for translation and technology and support. We're working with our partners at the Department of Neighborhoods to reach out to groups that have not traditionally been part of the conversation. We are working with trusted community advocates to reach those community members. We want to make sure that people who aren't affiliated with organized groups still have an opportunity to provide input. This means you don't have to be a member of the Highland Park Action Committee to comment on the Rocks Hill, South Del Ridge, Highland Park, and Riverview plan. We also want to be transparent about the limitations, expectations, and criteria. The reality that I'm sure all of you are following is that the global pandemic has had a significant impact on revenue that comes to local governments, including the city and the county. And so we will not be able to do all the things that we wish we could do. However, we want to make every attempt to do the things that are the most important for the community. Next slide, please. So here is our schedule. The week of June 22nd, the task force feedback should be coming into SDOT on both the materials and the process. Next week, we are going to finalize and translate those materials. The week of July 6th, we'll launch the website with online surveys, ballots, community-led prioritization. We're going to be providing briefings, and the community liaisons from our partners at Department of Neighborhoods will start outreach. On July 8th and the 22nd, we will update the community task force on our progress. The week of August 3rd, we'll wind up the community, the neighborhood prioritization. We'll get that initial review to the task force. We want to hear your input as to what we've heard back from community. on the week of the 19th, we want the community task force to do a secondary review to make sure we got it just right. And then on September 2nd, SDOT will present that draft plan to the community task force. And by the end of September, we will have a final Reconnect West Seattle plan, and we'll start implementing that. Next slide, please. So I just want to note that our next steps are with you to review the approach and the materials. We really want to hear from you about this. We want to talk about the schedule and how we're going to gather feedback and the materials. And so our three primary questions for you are: what are your questions and or feedback on the Reconnect West Seattle process? So that's a process question. What about the materials? Do you have any initial review or feedback on the materials or how to improve them? And how can we help you get this process going the week of July 6th? I want to note that every one of you has a role in this. We hope that you will be actively involved in sharing these materials out as soon as we're ready to launch on July 6th. And we also hope that you will, in your various social and other circles, be gathering feedback so that we can make sure we have the widest possible range of input as we develop these plans. Okay, so I will turn it over to Michael, and we'll have a good conversation.
Thank you. And Commissioner Sandberg, I see that your hand is raised, and I apologize for not seeing that prior, and I don't know if it relates to this conversation or to previous, but I want to acknowledge your digitally raised hand before jumping into some of the questions in the chat.
Thank you.
And I saw you come off of mute, but now back on mute.
Am I unmuted?
There you go. Can hear you now. Yes.
Yeah. My question was to the earlier discussion regarding the TAP and forensics review. I find it hard to understand how we could proceed with repair plans without clearly identifying through forensic structural analysis the specific causes of the structural failure. Also noting that the engineers have stated recently that the failure is continuing even without live load on the bridge. So that was the question I wanted to ask earlier, but thank you for getting back to me.
Michael, I think Colleen Desmond had a question on process. What's the best way, Heather, for members of the panel and other constituencies to provide feedback on the prioritization process?
So if you want to provide feedback right now on the materials before we send them out send them out into the wild, there are a couple of ways that you could communicate. You could share your feedback right here verbally or in the chat. You could also send an email to Diane or Bill Laborde with your feedback, and we can incorporate that in. I suppose it just depends on whether or not you want to say it out loud or whether you want to share it more personally. I think my vote is that the more we can share our process and other ideas in the group, the more we can get a sense of whether the rest of the group is in agreement with the changes that you'd like to see.
I also want to read Jolene Haas had a question just before Colleen's, and Jolene, I know that your microphone is not working. So reading your question, why is the West Marginal Way not included in your transportation plan?
So West Marginal Way, East Marginal Way, and Airport Way are all being considered together and are part of a process that is just slightly different. We will bring those changes to this task force as well. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I did, Heather, if I can pop in.
Sure.
Yeah, West Marginal Way is a little tricky. Jolene, I want to acknowledge that we've had some conversations this week because there's a pre-existing project related to Longhouse access. And we're going to have SDOT come to your meeting on the 30th, so we appreciate that opportunity. Then there is, as Heather mentioned, looking at West Marginal, East Marginal, and Airport Way in conjunction. As well, there's also a specific list of projects considered that are being related to freight access that tie into streets, including West Marginal Way, that provide the freight connectivity. So it's not unfortunately all in one document, and we should talk about that, but there are many different considerations around West Marginal Way in different parts of this process. It is really critical corridor for many people's connectivity. Thanks.
Another question from Dan Austin. Anything we can do to streamline this to less than a 3-month timeline?
Well, I wonder if we could go back to the schedule, Megan, just a couple of slides back. So we feel pretty strongly that it's important that we have everything translated out before we launch. So that's coming up here really quickly. We also feel pretty strongly that the neighborhoods need a month to do the work. I think that if the community you'll notice that the community task force and SDOT from the beginning of August to the end of September have those 2 months. And so I think if the community task force wanted to tighten up their opportunity for review and comment, we could definitely take some time out there. And I believe we could also tighten up how long it takes SDOT to come out with that final Reconnect West Seattle plan. But a lot of this is going to depend on how much the community is in alignment with what we are trying to achieve.
And Heather, while you're talking about timeline and things being condensed, just jumping a little bit, but to stay subject relevant, Anne asked the question, is there a way to fast track any of the lowest cost, highest impact improvements that are, quote, no-brainer items, for instance, improving detour signage and changing timing of traffic lights? Acknowledging that Patrick Robin, you have your hand digitally raised, and we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I think that there are some things like traffic signal timing adjustments and detour signage that we just are continuing to do. And so if you see things in those plans that you feel like fall into that no-brainer type category, please just let us know, and we'll see what we can do. I do want to acknowledge, though, that we are in this resource constrained environment, and so we want to make sure that we have the resources and the staff capacity to do the things that are the most important for the communities that we're thinking about here. And so we want to make sure we have an opportunity to get that feedback.
Thank you, Heather. Patrick Robinson, your hand digitally raised. While we work to come off of mute, we have another question from Commissioner Steinbrook. Will there be similar outreach to maritime industrial stakeholders?
Yes, the maritime community, as you know, has a monthly town hall. We will certainly share information with the folks who regularly attend that meeting.
Thank you, Heather. Deb, I see you have raised your hand in the chat box. So Deb.
There's that unmute. Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out to my colleagues that at the very beginning of the chat, I added some comments that I came up with on the maps and on the lists. I'm going to speak them out loud for folks who are listening in. On the maps, I have some suggestions. Consider making the maps interactive, such as you click on a map number and it brings up the project name and project description. Another idea is add all schools, including the colleges, parks, and key infrastructure, fire stations, etc., to the maps. Georgetown map, put Corson Street on there. You covered up the blue line covers Corson Street. Lists. I would encourage each list section to be page 1 of 2, page 3 of 2, etc. To make it easier to review. There's a lot of lists, and if your staples come undone, you're in a world of hurt with all the pages. Another item, denote those list items that are duplicated on the freight and the bike NPP pages. So there's a lot of cross-reference, a lot of duplications, I think, but it would be good to get acknowledgement of what stuff is duplicated. Project description should have a general intersection area if it's not listed in the project name, just for helping everybody get understanding of what these big lists are. List the name of the project source, and this goes into the no acronyms, please. The GMS I figured was Georgetown Master something or other, but I didn't want it to be Georgetown Mean Streets. So try and list a name out somewhere. Is there a way to flag things that are monitoring specific? And maybe this is in a different sort of a format list, but things that are monitoring may have a different reflection than something that is immediate. Lastly, then it would be useful to know what can all these things be done for, can each item cost less than $100,000? I have no idea. If somebody knows that, please share that. And how many of these things require permits or not? And I think that would be useful information too. Thank you. Oh, and at some point I want to come back because I have a question.
Thank you for reviewing your comments. We have those, and none of these projects, to mine, they're all SDOT projects, so we don't need to permit ourselves. And I'm just trying to like roll over in the back of my mind what kinds of projects we are, but most of these are traffic oriented projects, so they wouldn't require permits. If there's something that impacts the navigation channel, we would need to have a permit from the Coast Guard, but a project like that would cost more than $100,000. So I don't think there's anything on there that would require.
Okay. Can I ask my other question? This is me just wanting to know, I reviewed the freight, I reviewed all the plans, the process pages and the maps and the lists of projects. And I'm curious why the freight map has freight so focused on Michigan I-5 access versus Spokane I-5 access. And so that's something maybe for someone else to answer, but I was just curious about that.
I think that's a really good thing to point out in your comments, Deb, and we can take a look at that and see if we need to make some adjustments.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Wonderful, Deb. Thank you so much for your constructive comments. And yes, people are taking careful note of everything that everyone has to share, and we deeply appreciate that. John Persack asked a question. And the question is, or rather asking if he can make some comments and questions with regard to neighborhood process in Georgetown specifically.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'll put a summary of my comments in the chat box as well. You know, Georgetown has a pretty unique situation. We have to leave the neighborhood to access most basic services. And I learned today that SDOT is moving to shelve one of the mobility plans for bike access to downtown from Georgetown, which would be a critical alternative to driving. And driving, of course, is going to become more of a problem here. So it seems like we might want to take a second look at that because it looks like we might be going in the opposite direction that maybe we might need to go for our community. Another point I want to bring up is Georgetown and the freight community have a very complicated and strained relationship, but I think in this instance, our interests are aligned, in particular with safety mitigation. And I think it would be important to highlight where these alignments are, because I think there may be some opportunities to really identify some things moving forward. We in Georgetown, we're not getting regular data on shifting traffic patterns and traffic counts. I've noted that West Seattle has through Lisa Herbold's communications and maybe some other communications as well. And we're asking for this data and other data points because that'll be helpful for us to form the conversation around as we get closer to July 6th. Some immediate issues, we have a lot of dangerous drivers coming through, lots of speeding, lots of road rage. Some of this was documented in a Seattle Times article, and we're gonna need some immediate relief from some of these things. And finally, I believe we're gonna need some city assistance and community outreach. We have multiple languages, older residents that are not so plugged into the social media and web platforms, and probably true for South Park as well. I know that direct mail is something the city has used in the past. I don't know what the feasibility of direct phone contact would be, but we have limited capacity to do community outreach. And I know Peter Steinbrook from the port could attest to that because him and I have done some of that work. And it's a Gordian knot down here sometimes to really get people to talk because it's such a diverse community.
Right.
So I'll stop there. I appreciate the time. So thank you.
John, at the last Georgetown meeting that we had, I don't think you could make it. We talked a lot about that, and Georgetown is actually going to, we've already set up something with them for a paper, like a paper survey, and there's going to be a Dropbox at Fogey. Is that a thing?
Oh, yeah, the Friends of Georgetown History, yes.
Right. So there's that. And the second thing is I do want to make a note about that connection between Georgetown and downtown. We, as I've mentioned, and will continue to mention, the city of Seattle and SDOT is included there, is in some pretty significantly dire financial straits. And so we have the connection that you mentioned isn't part of the neighborhood plans because it's much, much more expensive than $100,000. We have reviewed those projects that we are going to pause in light of the bridge closure, but we're human and it's always possible that we missed something. And so, John, let me call you one-on-one and we can talk through the importance of that project and see if that's something that we can revisit. I do want to note that anything that we take off of pause means something else has to go on pause, because in this scenario right now, it really is a zero-sum game.
Understood. Quick follow-up. I understand the issue with doing paper input and a Dropbox, but I know that when there's any kind of project development in Seattle that requires permitting, there's a postcard or something that's sent to every household, and I think that would be an additional tool that would take the pressure off of our community that has limited resources and no paid staff to do any of this like the other communities do. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that we are at 1:30, and thus it means it's time to move on to our next subject matter, which I want to ensure has plenty of room and time, but these are extremely helpful verbal comments and the comments that people have chatted, and just want to remind every member of the task force that all feedback is welcome and can be done in any number of ways, including just simply replying to the note that was sent out with the materials attached. Also acknowledging your comment, Yasmin, that you didn't receive those materials, so we'll make sure that you do have them. You're ready for lots of megabytes in your inbox, and apologies for that in advance. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our co-chairs to take us into the next portion of our conversation. So Paulina, please.
Thank you, everyone. Once again, I am really grateful for all your questions. This is why we have a community task force, so appreciated all the interactions through the chat box and answering right away the questions. So we're going to move forward. Last week, we weren't able to get deep into the low bridge access policy, and I know there's already some questions that are being addressed at the beginning. So we're going to be hearing from Adiam Emery on what will be exactly talking about the expand access to the low bridge, as well as the city traffic. What are they doing as the mitigation or prioritization, as well as emergency respond, etc. So I also want to encourage you that we use the chat box, or that we bring up all the reflections or concerns that you have.
Great. Thank you, Paulina, and thank you for having me back. So I understand, I know the access to Lower Spokane Bridge has been something that's been talked about and evaluated in a continuous basis. And I'm happy to come here and announce that there are some capacity that we're building, and I'd also kind of walk through the difficult aspect of where this bridge sits and the pattern, the traffic pattern and others that we see. So the Lower Spokane is nested around a robust port facilities that we have. We have a maritime industry around it. It's the closest crossing point to the northern peninsula of West Seattle. It's our only swing bridge, which takes a little bit longer than other bascule bridges to open, but I think an average of 10 to 20 minutes. So we need to build in recovery time for the traffic platoon that we generate as we open the bridge. And just the complexity of this network sitting in this, we wanted to make it like a data-driven process in evaluating how this facility should operate with the integrity of maintaining a very reliable transportation network for this area. So since the closure, the lower access, we did have a policy that limit access to emergency responders vehicles, transit, and trucks or vehicles above 10,000 gross vehicle weight. As the governor are lifting the emergency response orders, we continue to analyze the traffic volumes and be data driven to inform whether it's opening access or evaluating the integrity, again making it reliable network. As we continue to evaluate this process, we want to make sure that we create data driven policy, and we continue to evaluate this. I want to make sure that we make this policy to be dynamic, and again, which would allow us to kind of, whether it's opening it up even further or restricting further, like just we need to understand walking into this, making it a very dynamic policy. It also helps us in kind of adjusting things that are coming down the pipeline. For instance, Terminal 5. There is an expansion to make it more of an international terminal in spring of 2021. We want to understand what that means. It also I want to kind of highlight the complexity of the port has different traffic pattern trends than your commuter trend. So the surge and traffic volume in freights that we see are related to the port operation. So as we evaluate and discuss this thing, we want to be equitable about who has access and creating access through the system that can be successfully administered and enforced. Next slide, please. What we're seeing regional, we are seeing a reduction in traffic volume around the region. This is the trend that we've been seeing within the city network. But this doesn't equate to the Lower Spokane Bridge. So just kind of this is just a reflection or a reminder that as traffic returns, the lower bridge cannot be a great solution to address all the traffic demand that is growing, in this area, whether it's for our future expected and what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a lot of volume using this. So enforcement is critical to avoid and making sure that we sustain the integrity of emergency responders vehicle needing to respond at a faster pace. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? This is the data analysis that I mentioned. And in here, we're seeing when closures prior, the yellow line is in February pre-COVID and pre-bridge closure. And when we placed enforcement, partnering with SPD, we created an AM and PM peak enforcement, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. And clearly you can see it through the graph where we have compliance when we have enforcement and a growth of usage when we don't have the enforcement. And we will continue to do those things. Again, this is just a reflection. This is an eastbound approach, which, that emphasizes enforcement is helping us. It also, the cap that you're seeing, the green line here, is the capacity of the network, which equates to what we can accommodate before we get to a failure point, which is what we need to avoid. Next slide, please. This is another look at the westbound approach. Again, very trendy in terms of the commute trend. You're seeing an increase, but what I talked about, enforcement making a difference relative here as well, it showcases it. Again, and the goal and objective of my division is to make sure that we have a reliable network, that we're not breaking the network, and maintaining the integrity, making it accessible for emergency vehicle. Next slide, please. Again, this is just a quick look at what the weekend trends are looking as well. It's looking, usually we have capacity built on the weekends, but in terms of Lower Spokane, we're seeing at capacity or usage, a higher usage of the bridge, which means as we get back to normal again, the restrictions are getting lifted. Just it's showing us trend in which capacity is limited on the weekend as well. But the good thing is, like I stated, we want to be data driven. We want to continue to analyze. We want to continue to shift. We want to continue to take what we're learning from the data in tweaking the policy objective as well. Next slide, please. So the analysis summary, here's the takeaway. We have the 5-legged approach on the west side of the bridge. The Chelan 5-way intersection is a key limiting factor to adding additional volume here, not to mention that we narrow the bridge down to 1 lane at one point. As I stated, the green line that I indicated on the initial maps, the total amount of the 400 to 500 vehicle per hour in each direction is the max cap. And taking our current and future assumption of the use of freight, transit, emergency responders vehicle, that we believe we can allow an additional 160 vehicles per hour to use in the bridge in each direction when restrictions are fully enforced. This is somewhat like, as I stated, again, I'm going to reiterate over, we're going to get a moving target as we allow other vehicles types through and continue to evaluate the condition and continue to evaluate the policy and identify opportunities and identify things that are actually contributing to the lack of, creating a reliable operational, network in here. So within this task force and the partnership that we continue to develop, I want to kind of introduce it as a way in which to continue to work on it. But this is the number that we have right now, and we're continuing to work with SPD and SFD and concurring the analysis and the output that we see. So for that, I'm going to turn it to Heather to present the recommendation to this task force. Heather?
So you all have heard from Audium that we have 160 slots to allocate. Our recommendation for now is to open up the Low Bridge to overnight access for everyone from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., 7 days a week, and to allow school buses and shuttles to use, school buses and school shuttles, buses big, shuttles maybe a little smaller, to use the Low Bridge. This hopefully will reduce the stress that some parents are feeling, wondering how they're going to get their kids to school in the fall. Some recommendations that we need some input from the task force include van pools. So King County Metro Transit van pools seem like a real no-brainer, but at this point in our global pandemic, they are only allowed to carry 2 riders. And so that's not a whole lot different than a regular carpool. And so we just wanted to offer that up for people to consider. Obviously, the maritime and industrial users need work access to Harbor Island and the Low Bridge, not for commuting purposes, but for work access. We would also like to see if we could get employer-based shuttles like, Expedia, Microsoft, Starbucks, those shuttles to be able to use the Low Bridge. All of those 3 options are pretty easy to operationalize. There are, since we're going to be enforcing this using cameras, all of those things are recognizable and have license plate numbers associated with them that can be managed centrally. The final one, though, and this was important for the mayor as well, is allowing essential healthcare workers and pandemic response folks to use the Low Bridge. We 100% support the ethic behind this. We're finding it a little bit hard to identify how we would operationalize it. So we definitely would like to hear from the task force on that idea. So access, in order for us to grant access, it needs to be within the Low Bridge capacity. So for example, between school buses, van pools, maritime, employer shuttles, and essential healthcare workers, we can only have 160 vehicles additional vehicles on any hour. It needs to be equitable. We don't want to create a situation where we are opening up the Low Bridge access in an inequitable way. It also has to be enforceable. So it has to be tied to either vehicle type or a license plate number. And it needs to be dynamic because things change and we need to be able to adjust what we allow on that Low Bridge over time. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the next steps today are we'd like to have your feedback on those ideas. And as soon as I get through these items, we can go back to the recommendation slide. What do you think is easy for us to approve right now? What do you think needs more time or more data? And we wanted to also let you know that there are conversations underway right now with potential users to understand how we would operationalize, and that is with the maritime and industrial users as well as the employer shuttles. Megan, why don't you go back to the last slide so that we can base our discussion there? Over to you, or Greg.
I got a question on emergency vehicles. obviously we want unfettered access for emergency responders. But West Seattle has a police precinct, and West Seattle has a number of fire stations and an array of equipment. So what is the emergency response need, and how has it been utilized since March 23rd?
Adiyam, I think this is you.
So there are, what we hear from fire are, there are specialty fire stations that they trigger depending on the response. For instance, the Fort and Horton fire station, it has a heavy and helps them, you know, so, and there's also a fire station that's nestled, that's very close to the Lower Spokane Bridge, that their primary reroute is this bridge. So there are needs in which, yes, facilities are there, but there are expertise in which they need to bring from all stations that they work it out. So that's what we're hearing from SFD, that they need to gather the resources from everywhere. It's not just the immediate precinct or fire stations within the peninsula that support responses.
Acknowledged, but I think it would be useful if we had a log of what that's looked like in the last 3 months. Because it is the controlling factor right now on your analysis. And it might well be that transit should be, or that freight should be, as opposed to a very incremental public safety benefit. We need to have that access, but those specialized units, I think, have the ability to create that access in a relatively short time before they actually get to the incident that already has a significant response.
We work from data that's generated from SFD that they provide to us continuously, because one of the monitoring factor for us in terms of operation is that. So yes. So we could partner with them. We continue to assess those things. So as part of our data analysis and evaluation is taking their data as well and factoring that in, and providing level of service, so prioritization. So that's what we base it from.
So I've had some experience with the fire department, and they're great people, and you want them there. You want them there quickly when you need them. But they also have a tendency to ask for a perfect situation when perhaps really, really good would suffice. So I'd like to see some of that data. Thank you.
We'll provide that. And those are good comments, Mayor Nichols. So we'll continue to work, and those are great.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge we have about 11 minutes here in this conversation, and taking it all the way back up to the start was a question and comment from Jill Mackey. And Jill, do you want to ask the question? I'm happy to read it for you if that's easier. And acknowledging that it was echoed by Bob Waters, John Persack, and Commissioner Steinberg.
Right. So thank you for the opportunity just to mention this, but maritime industrial entities located on Harbor Island are very much willing to limit what they're asking for in terms of access to the low bridge, but we do have some business critical needs. So just as an example, because I'm familiar with my company, Vigor, which is the shipyard on the north end of Harbor Island, we have approximately 600 people there, and we have a number of people who could use access to the low bridge, but we have requested access for 2 to 5 entities because it is essential for those entities to quickly be able to get to our operation because of the work we do in defense and also the safety of our workers needing critical access. So we would urge moving from recommended for further consideration to recommending now access to a limited agreed upon number of maritime industrial users into the recommendation now, recognizing, as Heather said, that this is dynamic and things could change and you may have to adjust in the future. So that's my request.
Jill, what number would that be for the maritime industry?
You know, I'm so, as I don't speak for the whole industry, but there has been some work through both the Port of Seattle and through the Office of Economic Development to gather some needs. I do know that when those needs were gathered, some entities like us gave the bare minimum and other entities weren't that discriminating. I think a second round of inquiry could really reduce what is being asked for. And so I would guess that maybe somewhere be 100 and 200 vehicles, trips might be requested. For us, for our 600 people, we would be requesting 10,
So
4 to 10 trips a day.
Yeah, we do have all of that information, and it is substantially more than the 160 slots that are available for everyone. And so, we're happy to go back out to the maritime community to see if they can sharpen their pencils a little bit. But just something to ponder for the folks in the maritime community, of that 160 slots that are available, what and you have to answer right now, you can answer later, but like what percentage of that should be allocated to the maritime industry? And the reason that's important is that we need to enforce this by automated enforcement. And so we would need license plate numbers on a regular basis to keep that working well.
And
so it actually does have to be a number.
I think we should have a conversation with in our industry. My point is there is critical need now, not 4 months from now. So we would like to have that conversation and move it into the recommendation now within, the coming week.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge with time being tight, we may not be able to make it to everyone's questions, but I want to start in the order of hands raised. And we have, I'm going to turn to some digital hands raised. I'm going to go to Amanda Kirk, whose hand is digitally raised, and then Commissioner Steinbrook, whose hand is digitally raised.
Hey, thanks. So quick question on recommended further consideration for essential healthcare workers pandemic response. What does the pandemic response mean? In my mind, I kind of know what it means, but I want to know what you guys think it means.
Yeah, so the thing to remember here is that access to the Low Bridge is not for commute purposes, it's for emergency access. So identifying, and this is something that we would have to work with the healthcare industry on, identifying those folks that are required outside of regular getting to a job at a certain amount of time. This honestly is the recommendation that we have the least flesh on, but we did want to hear from the task force whether or not we felt like that was a consideration that we should move forward on exploring.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to go to Commissioner Steinbrook, and then I also see Councilmember Humboldt has her hand raised, and then I will return to questions in the chat box.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize for my perpetual questioning and peppering the presenters. It's just that the dialogue raises continuously new questions. But to Jill Mackey's point, I think that her legitimate call for a set aside for critical access needs for the Harbor Island area needs to be fully evaluated. And I understand that there is some initial survey work that has been done, and this would include the Alaska Marine Line's needs to serve most of the state of Alaska and to have the free flow of goods that they take on their barges every week. So things like that and the thousands of jobs there. So I think we need to actually get into much finer assessment of what those critical access needs are and how we can best allocate them amongst the maritime and industrial needs in the area is all I would ask for.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Herbold?
Thank you. Like a little bit more information. Recommendation now means what as far as the timeline, and then also recommended for further consideration. What I'm hearing is you're talking about not until fall. In addition to the surveying that you've talked about, what are the impediments for recommending these other types of transit options? I understand that we're talking about automated enforcement and there's some legislative work, but I'm not quite sure I understand why we can't look at van pools, maritime industrial users, employer shuttles, and essential healthcare workers sooner than fall.
So it wouldn't be fall. It would be as soon as we can get it squared away. Recommendation now means like now, as soon as we can operationalize it, we would start allowing overnight access and for school buses. For van pools, right now, according to the tenants laid out, they can only have 2 people in them. And so once van pools can carry more than 2 people, we think they should go immediately to the recommended now bucket. For employer shuttles, what we are looking for from employer shuttles is some assurance that they will share with us some level of data about how many people they are carrying. And that's similar to the van pool idea. We want to make sure that as we are opening up access to the low bridge, we're doing that to modes of transportation that are carrying lots of people. As far as the maritime and industrial users, we agree. We agree that the maritime and industrial users that need to access the low bridge, not for commute purposes, but for everyday operational needs of their business, should be able to have that. The difficulty is that the number of slots that the maritime industry has requested is well beyond what the bridge can handle.
Right. I thought I saw in an earlier slide that the automated enforcement isn't planned to begin until fall, and I thought that was a component of
we can't have the cameras up until August. I think of August as summer, but maybe other people have a different idea. So in August, we would be able to set up these cameras, and then we could do the enforcement without the expense and staff capacity of having the bridge staffed by police officers during the peak periods. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Michael, we've gone, if I see this correctly, we've gone beyond our time on this item, or do we still have some time?
We are at time, and so I think I'll defer to you for asking what that might mean to the rest of the task force members.
I would like to suggest this. This is one of those areas that we all know about and understand and can touch, and I know that there's a desire to have more conversation. May I suggest that we advise SDOT to move forward on their recommendation for now, and that they move, as Commissioner Steinbrook pointed out, there's more work that needs to be done in maritime, but it's really not our work, it's SDOT work.
Mm-hmm.
That van pools not be included at this point, but that the others, subject to further clarification and definition, that those all seem reasonable for expanded use of the lower bridge at this point, and not wait. Particularly the van pools, we would wait until they're actually part of a higher capacity system. but I think the others with that additional work seem reasonable to move forward with for low bridge usage as soon as we can make that happen.
Okay, great.
Is there any huge objection to that? Okay, great. You have our best advice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your good work on this. It's not an easy thing to parse out 160 slots in a system that used to carry 100,000. So thank you for your hard work.
And to continue the conversation there, I'm just acknowledging there are obviously discrete conversations that need and will be happening, but also want to acknowledge for every task force member, we acknowledge all of your comments and appreciate all of your comments and invite continued dialogue, not only on the Reconnect West Seattle approach and your thoughts therein, but also in this regard in email. And SDOT is perennially available for additional conversation and understanding with regard to the facts and information shared here today as well.
All right. Where are we on our agenda? We are done. We are wishing people a happy 4th of July. Thanking you for your good work in these last 3 weeks, getting up to speed, getting to know one another a bit, and helping us, I think, set the stage for a productive summer. So we're going to be meeting at this point, we'll be meeting every other Wednesday, starting on July 8th. In the meantime, Councilmember McDermott, happy birthday next week on the 2nd. And to everyone else, be safe, and we'll see you 2 weeks from today on this platform. Thank you all.
Also, I just want to very briefly to respond to our reflection forms. Greg and I are both reading them and trying to incorporate your feedback, questions, as we want to frame it to the way that makes sense to community and you, of course. Thank you all, everyone, and see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.